So we're saying like the art of sales. Do you think it
Mhm.
is? I know we said like
No.
digitally or physically, it's almost the same thing. Do
Mhm.
you think it changes at all when you're talking to different audiences, such as if you're a B2C to
Mhm.
consumer or if you're B2B? Do you think there's two different alleys there instead, like on
Yes and
that
no.
track?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. You're probably picking up a theme. I seem to be answering everything yes and no. um, yeah. So strategically, no. So the fundamentals are the same in
Mm.
terms of you need to identify your audience and identify their needs, and serve to those needs and to the best of your ability. Tactically, yes, there's obviously some really significant differences tactically between those two things.
Mm.
That when you're engaging consumers, you're generally engaging in a much either higher volume, lower incremental purchase, etc., etc. It tends to have a wider spread approach, and therefore that's why like we were talking earlier, also with marketing, you're doing a bit more catch-all. Whereas B2B tends to be a smaller audience number, but tends to have much clearer matrix, and therefore you can pinpoint right in
Mm.
to really clear deliverables. But they are only tactics; they're not the strategy. The strategy stays the same, which is who is it that I should be talking to? What is it I should be asking them? Based on what they answer, what is the right solution for their needs?
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
it's a really
I would,
strong way of looking at
yeah.
it with them three steps. I think they sound so simple when you say them like that, 1, 2, 3, but
They are.
even ourselves, we find it's so easy to diverge away from them, because equally people are out there today, especially at the minute, shops are closing left, right, and center. People have got like no way to sell other than virtually sell. This could be a great way for people out there who are struggling with a physical store closing down.
Of course.
I think you have to have that ingrained into you, don't you, to keep going back to that true methodology rather than just go, oh, I can just get a quick sale here by skipping some of that.
Mm.
Yep.
Is there ever a right time to kind of ditch any of that process, or should you always stick to that as a fundamental rule?
You should always stick to it. Yeah. Fundamentally, and that you use that word, fundamentally, you should always stick to those disciplines. But you can tactically do them in different ways at a different pace. Like if you saw the process being those 3 steps, obviously there are more steps than that, but let's say it's a 5-step process. You could, in theory, do all 5 steps in one meeting, or you could, in some cases, as you guys know, take 25 meetings to get through those steps. What I would say to you is, if you think of that, if you try and circumnavigate that and jump from 1 to 5, you look at what's in the middle of that. And what actually is in the middle of that is actually understanding needs, listening to that, then giving them a proposition that matches needs. And would you ever miss that out? No. The reason people do is because you said, like, it's so easy, and it's true, and we are all guilty of it, me included, of jumping steps in that. And it's because we're human. Like we all have our human flaws. Impatience is one of the biggest drivers for that. Also, assumption. Like we assume we know the answer to the question, so we don't ask the question. And then it's only further down the track, even sometimes a year later, that you find out that actually wasn't what you thought it was. So sometimes you should just ask.
I think one of the things that you've helped us personally build out, and this might be really entry level stuff for some people, but I know it's helped us with our sales process, is just having them processes like a part of your pipeline as such. Like, I suppose before, to be completely transparent, before we started Fresh Movement, we didn't know what a pipeline was. Like, we did not know what and that, saying that now, even hearing
Yeah.
Even a year in, like now I laugh at that and think, how the bloody hell did I not know what that was? You know what I mean? How did I even think about starting up a business without that? Like some of this stuff is really important. And I think what we did is we took some of that early advice from yourself and we put that into our kind of pipeline. You can build that in Excel, you could use whatever. Like that was a really good thing that we locked onto quite early. Like if you do struggle, as I did, and as Liam did as well, about which stage at the process you're in, make it super simple for yourself. Use Post-it notes or do it on an Excel spreadsheet and make sure that you're just taking your customers through each of these steps, because especially when you're having different calls with different people at different times, it can very easily add up to, I don't know where I'm actually at with this customer. And then as we've found out, that can often lead to confusion and, losing the sale.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really good point, Gareth, actually. And there's obviously a much deeper conversation around our pipeline, but you're right. There's a very simplified view of it. And I would say I'm going to start back with empathy. Like, first thing is the purpose of the pipeline is not to guarantee a sale. The purpose of the pipeline is to ensure that you find exactly the right solution for your client. That's the purpose of the pipeline, and you want to go through it in those steps so you do that, because jumping it means, as we said earlier, you miss some of the key things that mean that you're assuming you know what they need, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, you've got an Eskimo mortgaged up to his eyeballs with 5 igloos that he doesn't need, if you know what I mean. So I think it is important to have those disciplines, but also understand the reason why. It isn't so you can bang out more sales, inverted commas. It's kind of the wrong mentality and wrong approach to have. It's actually to ensure that you optimize for success for your clients, even because if you can achieve success for them, you'll achieve success for yourself. And that hand-in-hand success is fundamental to a partnership. And I think one of the most important things to think about is that it's something you guys asked me once before. It's kind of like, well, aren't you an events business? What's happening at the moment now that COVID's here? How could you still be selling because you're not allowed to do events anymore? And the answer is quite simple. We're not an events business. We are a partner who helps our clients find the best way to engage their clients, whatever that is. And the rest is tactics, whether that's a physical face-to-face event, whether that's a digital event, a digital deployment, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's none of those things, whether it's, projecting their logo on the moon, whatever it is, our role is we can do it. Yeah, no, our role is to work with them to find out what their need is and come up with the best way of doing it. That's the key to that pipeline. And the pipeline itself, I would normally sketch it out. So it's, but it fundamentally is all about, firstly, the thing is, we went back and we were talking earlier about being fresh, being ripe. It's all about timing and understanding that. Also, the other side to timing is that the one single most valuable asset that everybody has, and I'll ask you guys this, actually, I'm going to ask a question before I answer it, and you think about this. What's the one thing that is anybody in the world would pay everything they have for above anything else?
What's the one thing in the world that they would pay everything they have in the world for?
And I mean, aside from the things like saying, like keep my family safe and all those kind of things.
I was going.
But for yourself, like what's the one thing, if you were faced with it and you had a choice, that you would pretty much give your entire wealth over for if you were offered it?
Life.
And it can't be health.
You tell me your answer.
I would say life. Like,
and what do you mean by say?
Like,
it's along the right. Yeah, and you think about that though. Like, what do you mean by life? Like, so if you were there on your deathbed and you were told you have a month to live, but there's a medicine that's going to take your entire wealth.
I'm going to be like Andrew Richards. Time.
You got it.
It's sort of the same thing. It's like
it is the same
another
thing.
man with the sales mentality.
I'll give you half of it, Liam. But you're right.
It is the same thing. You are right.
No, but you think you could be the wealthiest person in the world, But when it comes to it, if you are offered another year to hand over that wealth, you'd do it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You know, there's very few people that wouldn't. So understanding that time is your most valuable asset and the most invaluable thing you have, and then you go back to the other thing about it being fresh and ripe, combine those two things. Like, you want to, the beginning of that sales process, identify all of the ideal right people to be talking to. You don't want to waste your time or their time. You don't want to talk to somebody that doesn't have the need. But equally, you don't want to try and push something, a solution to them that they don't need either, because you're wasting their time and your time again. Like, why not spend all your time talking to all the right people and forming really good, positive relationships that you both mutually benefit out of? And that's what the process is about. So the first bit is just identifying it. The middle bit is then, straight after identifying them, talk to them. And that's where you're talking about, is virtual different to physical? No, it's just whether you do that via Teams or Zoom or whatever technology you use, whether you do that in person and meet them, whether you do that in a coffee shop, whether you do that your office, their office, whether you do that in the UK, the USA, the North Pole, or the Middle East, it doesn't actually matter. It's just have that conversation. And then the third bit of that is that conversation should involve more questions than telling. You should be understanding, back to your empathy, Gareth, understanding what they need. And then the fourth bit is agreeing that need, like matching that to something that you have as a solution, and also being honest. If you don't have the solution, try and be honest about that, but also try and point them in the right direction. You know, you think about the stores that you sometimes go into in other countries when you're on holiday and you're trying to find something, and then the store owners go, actually, no, go down the road, turn left, then on the right, and you'll find exactly what you need. You remember that store better than any other experience that you're there, and you then want to go back to it, not because they sold you something you didn't need, but because they helped you genuinely. So you try and keep true to that. Like, think about it, back to your empathy again, Gary. Think about that with empathy. And then if you do all that right, then actually the thing that everybody talks about selling, which is, are you a closer, is actually irrelevant. You know, because actually that's, again, that goes back to old school. That comes from the same people that talk about selling ice to Eskimos. Actually, if you see it as a partnership, you see it as delivering a solution, you see it as needing to listen, not tell, and then understand the difference between selling and telling is listening and then matching to needs versus just talking at people and saying, here it is, then actually it gets quite easy at that point.